Hello, everybody. Welcome to Appreciating Poetry with me, your host, Dr. Kelly. We've been enjoying a leisurely stroll through the songs of innocence and of experience by William Blake. And we've been looking at pictures and reading poems. And we've been trying to understand how Blake represents the relationship of innocence to experience. The background of this um, is Western Christian culture. Blake biographically was alive during the late 18th and early 19th centuries. He was a member of the Anglican Church. He was baptized, married, and buried in the established Church of England. Uh, However, based on the evidence of these poems and pictures, Blake was a very unorthodox uh, uh, English Protestant. And really, he was apparently a fully fledged participant in the dissenting trends of British Christian practice that we in America are familiar with when we think about the Pilgrim Fathers. Uh, they didn't, so far as I know, set up their own dissenting church, but they left England because they didn't want to be under the doctrinal control of the Episcopalian Church of England. So in England, there are lots of, or there have been lots of dissenting sects, SECTS, a word I have to pronounce carefully, uh, Anabaptists and Presbyterians and so forth. And lots of members of the Church of England also believed in more radical Protestant ideas. So the Church of England has a church hierarchy. It's described as episcopal, which means it has bishops. So there's a church hierarchy that grew out of the hierarchy of the Church of Rome. So when in the 16th century, uh, Henry VIII, King Henry VIII, established the Church of England, and the Church of England became the established Church of England. Lots of people didn't go for it. Even people who, like Blake, were nominally members of the Anglican congregation, but their belief system departed significantly from that of established British Protestant practice. Specifically, in Blake, we see a criticism of the general Christian doctrine that comes from the Gospel according to St. John, the epistles of the Apostle Paul, doctors of the church like St. Augustine, specifically this doctrine of innate depravity. That is to say, all people are born sinful because all people have inherited the sin of Adam. And it's this inherently sinful nature of humans that requires the incarnation of Christ and the redemption, the buying back of human souls from sin and death. So Blake is a lot more radical than most based on the evidence that we see in Songs of Innocence and Experience, because children, infants are not innately depraved. They're just lacking in experience, and we gain experience as we grow. So this is not songs of good and evil, not songs of sin and redemption, songs of innocence and experience. In very strict Christian interpretation, there is no such thing as innocence. Innocence means guiltlessness, unless we somehow think of salvation as the acquisition of innocence somehow. So we don't see innately depraved infants. What we see are children who speak as soon as they're able to speak and start making demands and start expressing truth as they understand it in their little childish understanding. So we saw the child on the cloud who gives the commands to the piper to pipe a song about a lamb, to sing the song, and then to write the book. Similarly, we saw a little naked boy talking to a sheep and discussing the creation. Little lamb, who made thee? Little lamb, I'll tell thee. See, so the little kid thinks he knows, but he's not very experienced. He expresses his experience such as he has it. Now, here's the important point. Innocence and experience are two sides, contrary sides, Blake says. I kind of wish he hadn't said contrary, but they're two sides of the human soul. And so within us, there's the innocent part of us that just drinks in experience. And then there's the experienced part of us that possesses the skills that are required to thrive on Earth. And what's true within us is also true socially, that experience takes care of little children. It takes enormous experience to help a newborn baby survive the night. And significantly, the innocent part of society, babies, make constant demands. They're crying out in need. And when experience is decent, as embodied in parents and other caregivers, they provide the needs without hesitation or question for innocence. Now, part of experience is the development of fear. That through experience, and experience can be direct perception of the world, but an awful lot of experience is social acquisition. I mean, an awful lot of experience is what we learn, not just by direct experience, but through interaction with other people. We saw that in The Lamb, in which the little kid says things like, "Little lamb, I'll tell thee," and then tells the lamb in a garbled way of the identity of the creator. And also uses formulations like "little lamb, God bless thee," so people don't just spontaneously emit blessings. So little kids learn that from grown-ups or older kids. So in general, in the poems grouped as songs of innocence, of which we've only looked at a few, there are many more poems in this book Songs of Innocence and Experience than we looked at. In general, in the Songs of Innocence, we see the world in its ideal form. We see the world before it's contaminated by negative experience. And this idealized view of the real world is epitomized by the shepherd in the introduction to Songs of Innocence, who plays the pipe. He plays a musical instrument. He creates art, but art is an application of technology. Moreover, his job is to take care of sheep. Now, the thing about sheep is they're in flocks. They're a herding animal, and they just sort of instinctively go where the food is. So they want to go to the pasture and graze. So the shepherd knows where the pasture is, so he kind of steers them there. But obviously, we know that the shepherd has the job not merely of sort of nudging the sheep in the direction of the pasture, but also of protecting the sheep from the dangers in the real world. So there are predators in the world, and the shepherd's job, part of it, and he may never have to initiate this part of the job, but the shepherd's job is to not just gently nudge the sheep in the direction of the pasture, but to protect them from predation, and also to serve that veterinary function, uh, helping ewes give birth, taking care of injuries, and all this sort of thing. So an inherent part of gaining experience is learning about the dangers of the world that are just built into the world. I mean, that people fall down and hurt themselves, sheep get sick, and there are predators in the world. And, predators are not evil. And so in the tiger, we see an expression of what appears to be a necessary part of experience, and that is, one is aware of the dangers of the world. One is capable of taking action in order to defend against the dangers of the world. But, we don't have perfect instruments for calibrating degrees of danger. And so we don't fear the unknown. We fear the known, or what we think we know. Right? So we live, in a sense, in the forests of the night. Right? We live in a world that has darkness through half of the day. And we live in a world that's just nature, and humans use their technology for good or ill to adapt nature for our own survival. So humans, more than any other species that I know of, not only use technology, but are dependent upon technology. So the piper in the introduction to Songs of Innocence, in order to write the book, plucks a hollow reed from the earth and stains the water clear to make ink. So, plucking and staining, these are very delicate acts of violence. And the earth doesn't just provide nutrition for animal species like humans. it also provides humans with the raw materials for technological production. And the world of nature has this violent dimension. So humans, because of our addiction and because of our dependency upon technology, we depend upon our knowledge, our factual knowledge, our scientific knowledge of the materials of nature. And we depend upon our technological skill, which essentially involves transforming or adapting natural materials to human use. So all of this adds up to, we depend upon our knowledge and our skill, but we don't have infinite knowledge and infinite skill. Therefore, we constantly have this feeling that that we don't have enough knowledge, and so we're in darkness. And we don't have enough skill, and so there's this sort of chaotic natural world that's not particularly friendly to humans, and the human needs, however delicately, to violate nature in making technology. And so that's this phrase, the forests of the night. And we think we know that there's a predatory danger in the forest of the night that's threatening us. That's the meaning of tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. So yeah, there's a tiger in some faraway forest, but that's not the forest of the night. The forest of the night is that aspect of nature that we don't know, that we don't control, that we are subject to. And that subjectivity or that subjection is a source of fear, because we feel threatened by that which we can't control. So the point of this is that we don't fear the unknown. The state of unknowing is a very uncomfortable state, but we don't fear that state in itself. What we fear is what might be or what we imagine is in that darkness, right? So tigers don't burn brightly, and the forest of the night is not a place on a map. These are mental states. So there's an ideal relation of innocence and experience, and innocence is pure and simple, right? Innocence simply demands to be cared for. And, that's part of each of us. It's also certainly a part of society. Experience is the know-how that allows us to care for ourselves and care for other people. And however we care to value this, the reality is that humans adapt experience to technology. Technology means the adaptation of natural materials to human use. And when I say human use, it sounds like it's optional. No, we have to, we humans cannot live in the state of nature, because for a long, long time, we've had agriculture. And I mean, before that, we had all kinds of technology that we use for survival. Okay. Ah, London. So London's a big city, big city, one of the biggest cities, maybe even the biggest, I don't know. But in the end of the 18th century, it was just a very big city. And that's where Blake lived and worked. He was a member of the artisan class. They have very fine class distinctions in England. So he was not a middle class guy who like owns a hardware store, an ironmonger's shop, much less, investing in manufacturers. So neither lower middle class nor upper middle class. He's below, so he's kind of at the top of the working class. Not that we need to understand much biography, but the first line of this poem. Let me read the first sentence of this poem. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet the marks of weakness and marks of woe. The Thames is the river that flows through London. So London Bridge and several other bridges are over the Thames. So streets are in cities, and it's important to understand words, city streets. So we might talk about country roads or country lanes. But streets are in cities. And I wander through each chartered street. That's very interesting. So there's streets in the city. The streets in the city are chartered. What does that mean? Well, I guess it means they are legally constituted, right? So every street has a name, and presumably that name is registered with the government, or at least it's common consent that there's Drury Lane, which is a street, and there's what other streets were there in the 18th century? I don't know. So clearly, the streets in the city are part of the civic structure of the city. So it totally makes sense, or it's really kind of redundant to say that the streets are chartered. I wander through each chartered street. That's very interesting. To wander generally means fairly aimlessly, or at least in a relaxed and not very goal-oriented fashion. When we're wandering, we're just kind of going wherever. The word each is quite striking. I wander through each chartered street. So I'm wandering without much goal orientation, but I'm wandering through each street. So it's not like through each street I wander, but I wander through each street. So it's almost as if there's a certain exhaustiveness here, a certain comprehensiveness, that I'm going to wander each street and cover them all. So there's a tension between wandering and each street. So I guess no matter which street I wander through, I do something else, namely mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. So the subject of the sentence is I. The verb is wander, but there are two verbs. I wander and mark. Wander doesn't take a direct object. I generally don't want, we might say I wander the streets, but this says I wander through each street. So wander doesn't have an object, but mark has an object. So the verb to mark means to leave a mark, I guess. And so to mark on every face I meet means to leave the marks of weakness and woe? No, those marks of weakness and marks of woe have to be there already. So I'm not drawing on people's faces, I don't imagine. So this mark means it's a somewhat unusual usage and a somewhat old-fashioned usage, but this was written at the end of the 18th century. The verb mark here is kind of like to notice. Mark my words, right? Heed my words. So I witness in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. I experience it, I perceive it. But it's a very strange phrase, right? I wander and I mark marks. I notice marks. Okay, so it makes sense, or it's virtually redundant to say that each street is chartered. What in the world could chartered Thames mean? Okay, so I know that London was established by Romans. It was a Roman garrison. It was called Londinium. I don't know what the word Londinium means. And when the Romans lay out a garrison, it's on a grid. It's a rectilinear. Romans love rectangles. They love arches, but they love basic geometry. Uh, so when Londinium was established, uh, by the Romans, it was laid out as a rectilinear grid. But the Roman Empire gave up Britain. I mean, left. They went home after, I don't know, 100 or 2 years. And so the town stayed there, but for 1,000 years of Middle Ages, the streets just kind of got they sort of they sort of melted. And so medieval cities, uh, like London, Paris, Vienna, they don't have rectangular streets. They've got just these very narrow, very winding streets. Now, every street, uh, uh, so in a way, the streets weren't chartered. It's not like the city established, let there be Drury Lane, let there be Fleet Street. Maybe that didn't exist yet. What's that? Grub Street. It's like the streets just kind of evolved by the decay, essentially, of the rectilinear Roman grid. So it's after the fact that the street is chartered, you see? Now, what hubris, what arrogance for humans to claim to have chartered a river, right? But see, there's a wall that separates the Thames from the streets. I don't know how old that wall is, but I'm sure it's pretty old. So the point is, it's almost as if humans are giving the river permission to flow. So it strikes me that chartered streets is rather bland and virtually ironic, but we got to remember the streets are chartered after the fact. The streets come into existence and then society or government or common consent say this is Grub Street, this is Drury Lane. near where the chartered Thameses flow. So look, the city grew up around the river, you know. So it seems to me that the first chartered is realistic to the point of redundancy, but the second chartered is very ironic. You don't charter a river, and so for people to imagine that they've chartered the river is the height of hubris, of arrogance. And mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of love. So I see symptoms of physical decay, marks of weakness, and of psychological distress, marks of woe. I can see this in people's faces. And the rest of the poem is devoted not to vision, but to hearing. Now, in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, this is very much like chartered streets and chartered river. So, in what sense can we say that every man is crying? Well, as you walk through the streets of London in the late 18th or early 19th century, people are selling stuff. I mean, everywhere you go, somebody is selling stuff. They're selling goods, they're selling services, they're selling oysters, they're selling fruit brought in from the countryside, they're selling services like chimney sweeping, like knife sharpening. And so uh, uh, so one meaning, I mean, the meaning of the word cry is simply to call out. So when we say don't cry, uh, I understand in common parlance, we don't mean uh, uh, don't cry out. We mean don't weep. Weeping, you can weep silently, right? Weeping involves the shedding of tears. Crying, so we don't have a great word for weeping with your voice. And I don't think that's what's happening exclusively with every cry of every man. It may be that men are crying out in pain or weakness or woe. It may be that men are saying, help me. But it's also true that men are crying their wares. Men are announcing the goods and services they want people to purchase. So it's every cry of every man. So it's cries of all varieties. I simply want to say that crying isn't just the cry of pain. It's also the cry of commerce. Okay. So in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear. Now, infant refers to young babies who don't speak yet. Infans in Latin means something like not speaking. Does Blake know that? Yeah, probably so. I think we may be a little bit we in the 21st century have a different way of thinking of the stages of life. So this idea of a teenager, you know, that's kind of a 20th century thing. So my point is that when people speak of infants, I know we kind of use that word loosey-goosey as we do normally. However, strictly speaking, infants cry because they can't talk. And of course, the first thing that everybody does the moment they're born is start crying, start expressing need. right? So most of all, feed me. But also, relieve me of my pain, uh, if that's the problem. Uh, put me down to a nap. Boy, let me tell you, babies get real fussy when they're tired. And so it's interesting that there's a specific cry of human infants that means feed me, I'm hungry. There's a specific cry of human baby, I'm tired. Cry of fear. That's very troubling. So babies can react to threat. I mean, there is a reflex of babies, the startle reflex. And they'll, you know, don't try this with the next infant you encounter that would be inhumane. But when babies are startled, they throw their arms up if they're free. Um, so to the extent that we have a startle reflex, all humans in the infant stage, um, we sort of know fear. And so the gaining of experience, right? So baby cries, baby gets fed because baby's being taken care of by people who know how to take a baby, people who are equipped to take care of a baby. And that means our physical equipment, but also our technological equipment. So we're predisposed to fear, and fear is part of gaining experience. However, if we're decent grown-ups, we don't want babies to experience fear. So part of taking care of a person is preventing threat and preventing the perception of threat. So here we have babies that don't know how to talk yet, but they already have the experience of threat. So notice that um, just as the streets are chartered, but it's the height of arrogance to say that the river was chartered, it's normal for men to cry insofar as some of the cries are the cry of commerce. Um, and sometimes the cry is a cry in pain. And I will tell you that when I hit my thumb with a hammer, I cry out in pain and say words that I wish there were children around to hear. Right? So every cry of every man, I mean, that's just natural. Unless it's not, right? Unless men are crying out in pain that's imposed upon them by somebody else. But the infant's cry of fear, that definitely suggests irresponsibility, that somebody is not protecting this baby. Okay, in every voice, whether speaking or crying, in every ban, every prohibition, every uh, uh, issuance from power that says thou shalt not, in every voice, in every ban, the mind forged manacles I hear. Okay, so there's a very complicated relation of technology and fear. And we saw that in the tiger. So we understand that the tiger is the embodiment of fear. It's the embodiment of what we think we know that is a threat to us. And what we think we know is not always what's real. But the tiger is something we know. It's burning brightly in the forest of the night. And when the speaker of the tiger imagines the creation of the tiger, he imagines it in, or the speaker, they imagine it in technological terms. What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? So here we have a forge, a hammer, a chain, a furnace. And this forge creates manacles. I mean, manacles are chains adapted to imprisonment, to enslavement. Manacles are shackles or fetters. They're like big handcuffs and ankle cuffs that enchain people, enslave people, imprison people. And these manacles are forged not in a smithy, but by the mind, in the mind. So what imprisons us? Not so much chains of iron, but the chains that are forged in the mind. Now, here's a very important point. You remember I spoke about the internal relation of innocence and experience. Right? So there's the innocent part of each of us and the experienced part of each of us. And the experienced part of each of us takes care of us. And the innocent part of us guides us toward the satisfaction of our needs and toward the sort of life-affirming aspects of our existence. However, a big part of experience is technology, like the Piper's pipe. And a big part of experience is defense against threat, like the Piper's role of defending, the shepherd's role of defending the sheep against predation. So there's the internal worlds of innocence and experience. And really, that's the main one Blake is talking about when he talks about, unfortunately, contrary states of the human soul. However, there's also this social manifestation of innocence and experience, and this is extremely important because innocence obviously needs experience in order to survive, but experience also needs innocence in order to establish what's good, what's necessary, what requires care. So the mindfold manacles are, to some extent, a hegemony, a power grab by the experienced part of us, right? By the defensive part of us that acts out of fear. But this is true in a social sense because experience, which, right? So I'm talking about grown-ups who should be taking care of children, instead are irresponsibly neglectful and allow children to experience threat, hence the infant's cry of fear. But also, and worse, exploit innocence, as we will see in the later part of the poem. So the point I want to end with, I thought I would get through the whole poem today, but that's obviously not the case. the point I want to end with is that we forge manacles on ourselves in our own minds, but there are also mind forged manacles that power places upon other people. It's very important that the mind forged manacles aren't just some process, psychological process. It's definitely that, right? So I definitely uh, uh, fear things, and in reaction to that fear, I imprison myself. What I think is defense is in fact imprisonment, enslavement. However, this is also true in the social level, and that's really what uh, London is all about. That I see in every face marks of weakness. I mark in every face marks of weakness, marks of woe. So the mind forged manacles are manacles that we impose on ourselves, but they're also manacles that we impose upon other people. So the rest of the poem is about specific other people that are suffering weakness and woe as a consequence of having been subjected to mind forged manacles. Okay, uh, that's it for me today. We're going to read the bottom half of London next time. Thank you, friends. Bye bye.